All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on managing change and new revenue streams. We are happy that you could join us, and we hope that this new webinar series will help you out during this time. I'm Jennifer Lemaster with the University of South Dakota Beacom School of Business, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Before we get started, I just have a few quick announcements that I would like to share. First, all participants have been muted for the duration of the webinar, but we will be taking questions throughout the discussion. So as your question arises, please type it into the chat bar, or there is also the option to raise your hand, at which point we'll unmute your line and allow you to ask the question live. So please feel free to jump in at any time. We are going to cover a lot of great topics today, so whenever your question comes up, feel free to jump in. I also wanted to share a new initiative that we are launching through the Beacom School of Business. This new Student Center initiative is designed to promote business success in the state of South Dakota and throughout our region. And we really want all of the businesses that have been joining us on this webinar series to feel free to be involved. It's called Coyote Business Consulting Group, and we are going to enable student teams with the guidance of a faculty advisor to help businesses solve critical problems for their organizations so they can survive and stay competitive during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. So businesses will submit a project that they would like completed by our teams, and then if selected, we will pair you up with a team of our brilliant business students along with a faculty advisor to help connect and solve some problems for your business. It's available at no charge to the businesses, and it also helps students out because a lot of them are dealing with canceled or delayed internships. So I will include a link for this program into the chat bar if you're interested in finding out more. Now, without further ado, I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Greg Bertsch, one of our Innovation and Entrepreneurship faculty members at the Beacom School of Business. Greg has his PhD in biomedical engineering from USD, and in addition to teaching, he is the co-founder of Halamine Inc., as well as the founder and CEO of Antimicrobial Materials Inc. And he has been involved in the creation of several businesses throughout his career. Thank you, Greg, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I'm excited to be here. I got the word from Dean Venke way back, I guess, in March that he wanted to have a series of communications and discussions with the community. It, was going through COVID-19 challenges, and at the time, as Jennifer mentioned, my companies are all involved in technologies associated with antimicrobial surfaces. And so for us, we were really in the midst of just a real deluge of communication and getting a lot of attention, as you can imagine. So it was a big time for change for us on the business perspective or standpoint. But I also had a lot of friends who are also entrepreneurs, and the flip side of that is they were going through this incredible crisis of revenue in a lot of cases where their businesses are essentially shut down, gone down to zero in terms of cash coming in, and they were just in complete disarray over what to do. And oh, by the way, I also happen to be teaching this course at USD this semester called Managing Change and Growth. And so it really, I kind of felt this theme really, emerge like I really had to talk about it. So what I did is I took some of the content that I teach in the course, and then also tried to incorporate a lot of the things that I was seeing and things that I had learned over the course of a career with different aspects of change and how we can deal with it, and thought I'd talk to you about it today. So it's a work in process. I will tell you that. It's the first time I've actually presented this format. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it'll be informative and interesting and all that stuff. So I'm going to share my screen. If I can do that. We should have tried that, Jennifer, I guess, but I'm guessing it'll work without an issue. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that, right? Jen's shaking her head, yes, so that's good. So I wanted to start off with a quote that's really stuck with me over the years. I don't know how many of you remember this or know who Rahm Emanuel is, but Rahm Emanuel was the chief of staff for Bill Clinton back in period where the financial crisis was going on. And in 2008, he made a comment actually in an interview, I think in the Wall Street Journal. And it came out that he said something to the effect of, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." And of course, it was highly criticized at the time, and he was accused of being insensitive and not really understanding or being out of touch with what Americans were going through and so on. But I thought it was, while I can appreciate maybe it wasn't the best way to phrase it, I also really could appreciate the kind of the insightfulness in the quote because I think we all kind of intuitively see that, right? When change happens, there's sometimes silver linings that come with some of the hardship. So I think a better way, maybe if Rahm could have had the chance to rephrase his quote, he probably could have said something like this, that crises can be destructive and hard, but there are some good things that come of that. Old paradigms are disrupted. New problems also emerge in need of new solutions. Humans can accept or even expect change, which is not always the case kind of in business as usual sort of formats. And then the other outcome is that we get some insight into how to prepare for the next crisis that's going to come along. And we know there's going to be one. We know that there's likely going to be another pandemic. It'll be different, but it's coming again. So these are some of maybe the other considerations of crises. So I kind of took these elements and I built my talk today around these points. And I've organized this discussion really in 4 areas. First of all, I want to talk about changing paradigms and what that means. Next, I want to probably spend most of the time talking about new revenue streams. And I want to do this from the perspective of how you create new revenue streams under crisis or with speed, maybe is a better way to put it. Because we all kind of already understand maybe how do you develop product a little bit, and we have our systems, but how do you really do that more quickly and efficiently and eliminate mistakes and some of those other things? And then I want to talk about implementing organizational change. I won't emphasize that as much, but we'll touch on that. And then finally, preparing for the next crisis. And just kind of a heads up, we're probably going to have to go through some of this pretty quickly. Jennifer and I did a dry run yesterday, and I think our conclusion is we probably want to do some follow-up talks on some of these topics because you can spend probably an hour on each one of these points if you really wanted to. So I'm going to go through them fast. Like Jen said, we encourage questions. I don't want this just to be me talking for an hour. But I also know I've been teaching classes now online exclusively since spring break. I know how awkward this kind of interaction is with Zoom, and so I'm not really going to attempt to force that today. But I also, again, am more than happy to stop if questions come up and address them. So again, we'll see how it goes. This is all kind of new to all of us. So first of all, I want, before I get into some of the key points I want to talk about, just a quick business 101 refresher on the business environment. And I promise I'm not going to use a lot of academic business concepts in the rest of the talk, but I really thought this was pertinent, just to kind of recalibrate ourselves on what one way to think about this. So this diagram shows the different business environments that we consider. And so on the outer perimeter of this diagram, of course, it kind of looks like a dartboard. So the outside rim is the external environment. And so we we try to look at the external environment in terms of these PESTEL factors. And PESTEL is an acronym for political and economic and sociocultural, technological, ecological, and legal. And then the next ring within the dartboard is the industry environment. And the industry is the group of companies that support a particular market. Within the industry is a strategic group, and that is the group that is closely related to you. For example, you have a group of companies that are competitors, maybe suppliers, that are all within your strategic group. And then lastly, at the bullseye is you, your firm. And what is important about this diagram is that as we move away from the center of this dartboard, we have less and less influence on the environment. So we can, have a little bit of influence on our strategic group, some on our industry, but we get into the external environment, it becomes really, really hard. So if we have a set of paradigms, or if we have a specific business model, and we want to continue using that business model in the case of a very significant external environment disruption, our level of influence on that change of environment within the existing business model that we have is going to be pretty small, right? And so no matter how hard we try within that current business model, we're probably not going to have an effect. So that's a really good segue really into this conversation about paradigms. And so the first thing, if you have a disruption in a really severe sense and in a far removed external environmental factor, you really have to quickly change and figure out that your paradigms need to shift, and you really need a different business model in order to recover, in order to sustain your business in that case. So what does that mean? So in the current business model that we have put together really good systems and really good methods on how to actually execute, right? Most businesses are fundamentally designed to be really good at finding new customers that fit in their market. They're really good at processing quotations and putting up pricing, really good at operations, really good at cost reduction. These are the things that we fundamentally are focused on in a business that is ongoing and stable. We know what our revenue path looks like. We can predict it pretty well. And we just, we continue to execute better and better and be more efficient at doing that, more productive. But if our environment is now changed, being better at executing this current business model again doesn't really help us. It's not productive. So we really need to change a paradigm. And one paradigm shift that we can make is transitioning from executing our old business model to looking for a new one. And ironically, or ideally, the startup business model is a pretty good fit for doing that. And so the startup business model I'm going to talk about has really emerged over the course maybe the last 10 years. And it used to be that startups were just put together. They put together a business plan, and the business plan looked a lot like just a smaller version of an existing business. And so back in the late or the early 2000s or so, the standard mode of operations for startups was that they would get some funding based on this business plan, and then they would go out and they would hire these executives that were pretty well heeled, and then they would start to develop a marketing plan, launch this product, and all of a sudden they'd find out, and wait a minute, there's a problem here. And what they didn't really appreciate was that this business plan that was put together by a founder was made by somebody who really had no experience. Nobody had. This is something brand new. So this business model of X number of sales per year, or X number of units, or this is the customer base, had just fundamental flaws. Just because this was new, there was a lack of experience and understanding of what the business really was about. So as a result, you've heard the statistics. A lot of startups fail, and a lot of new products fail for that matter, about the same rate. And the biggest reason for these failures is that these companies, these products provide a service or do a job that really has no useful purpose. And what that means is these companies have gone out, they've spent all their money that they had to build a product that nobody cared about. And then they were out of money. They had no real life left, or no option other than to just to stop. And so that was a typical scenario. Back in about 2010 or so, the startup model transitioned to more of a searching model. So instead of companies putting together a detailed business model, then executing it without any sort of basis, we figured out really how to develop a searching process to identify a repeatable business model and validate that business model before we went off and spent the money that we had on industrialization or commercialization. So I want to talk a little bit more about that today. So the next part of this discussion is really transitioning and discussing how, if we've changed our paradigm now, we're looking more at how we can be more like a startup and think of ourselves more as a startup, at least in specific markets that we want to grow in, or new revenue streams that we want to try to tackle. How do we do that? What are some of the things that we have to think about, and what are some of the steps? So the first step that is undertaken, of course, as anybody has probably experienced, has been through new product concepts, is you try to find some kind of idea that is going to resonate with some set of customers. And the way that you do that typically is by doing some searching, and there are different ways that we can search and discover these ideas. And so I've listed 6 of them here that we pretty commonly talk about in kind of the entrepreneurial side of the world, the startup world. And the first one is we try to find products that match customer needs, and do specific jobs maybe that customers need to have performed. The second is to do something called copy tweak that I'll talk a little bit more about. The third is brainstorming. There's also ways to tap into your employees for ideas. The fifth is through licensing. And then the sixth one isn't really maybe so much a new idea, but looking at vertically integrating a portion of your supply chain or value chain that is also a path to expanding your revenue. So I typically start off asking questions when it comes to jobs and products of, what am I buying when I purchase this device? And if we were in a kind of an interactive setting, I'd probably hear responses something like, well, you're buying portability, you're buying efficiency, you're buying something with good value, and those would all be true. But is obvious that is not entirely, well, it's obvious, but it takes a while for people to kind of figure out, is what you're really buying with this is you're buying a hole. You're buying what you really want when you buy a drill is you want a series of holes, or a hole. That's why you're buying this device. And so the job that you're doing is you're creating holes, and this happens to be the tool that you're going to use to do that. So that's what we want to do. We want to figure out what jobs need to be done with our certain sets of customers, or what customers have certain problems, and we want to do that job in a way that makes sense. So I want to first of all introduce Lindsey Piers. And Lindsey is the founder of the Craft Studio. And her traditional business was in New York City, they have a a shop, and she offers basically birthday parties for kids. They come to her facility, and she's got it set up just very conducively to doing birthday parties, different events. She does camps and workshops. Traditionally, she's done those on site, but she's also gone to remote locations, or I should say she's done them in studio, but she's also done them on site in people's homes or in other venues of their choice. And she also has some retail space in her studio too, where you can buy crafty kinds of things. Well, obviously in the COVID-19 era, her business essentially went to zero in the in-studio side. And so what she was able to do is figure out some new jobs that she can do with her customers. And one of the jobs in particular, she recognized, first of all, that she really is offering, or the value proposition she offers is in entertainment, which is a psychological sort of value proposition. And so that being said, one of the jobs that could be done, one of the pains that some of her customers, her previous customers were going through, is that kids were home now, they weren't going to school, and they were bored. They were looking for something to do. So she took that opportunity and created a more of an online presence and did a number of different things. So she offers, a series of events online, crafts that they can do. She has a subscription service where people can subscribe to, to daily or periodic craft events. She offers kits that she ships and delivers. She's focused more of her time now into sourcing new and better, more creative products that she can use to enhance the experience. And so what she's actually gained now, she's improved her online infrastructure. Number one, she's gone from having a weak presence, very little security, to now she's got a great sense or a great structure around delivering products and creating messages online. She's also expanded, of course, into new markets, because the online delivery format can be ported into just about anywhere around the world now. So she's expanded her markets, and she's also enhanced her offerings. So when her business does come back, she'll be able to do both, and she'll have new revenue streams on top of her old ones. So this is an example of really understanding your customers and reacting to that. And so one of the tools that we use in kind of the startup world is this concept of value proposition, and the value proposition canvas is the tool. And it's pretty simple. What we're trying to do on the right-hand side is figure out, oops, that's a typo, it should be our customers, what our customers' jobs that they want to do are. And there's typically, we classify those into 6 different categories you can see there that kind of help us figure out what kind of business we're really in. And within those customer jobs, the value comes in providing gains to our customers and relieving pains. And so we try to match that with the product that we want to offer. And so if you go from right to left, the gains and pains from our customers match the gains that we create, the pains that we relieve in our product, which ultimately help define the scope of the products and services that we want to offer. So that's how that works. And again, what we're trying to find here is something called product market fit. We want our product to fit intimately with what our customers are looking for. So the next example I want to introduce is Adam Chappell. So Adam is what I've called a progressive farmer. He's been farming for, I think they said, four generations. And in 2010, he was devastated, almost went bankrupt because of a serious case of herbicide-resistant pigweed. And he didn't, he his response to the crisis was that he started to do a tremendous amount of research, and he looked at research in different parts of the country and what people were doing. He did research in different crops and different sustainability options. And what he came up with was a whole new system of farming. And his system combined things that are already out there and that were being used by others, but in combination, they were pretty unique. So one thing he did is he started a no-till farming operation instead of, your typical go through and disc the entire fields, have bare fields that go into the season. He implemented the no-till practices, and he also introduced a cover crop, which allowed him to also resist a lot of the disease, resisted a lot of the erosion problems, and preserve soil levels, improve soil quality. He actually used rye as a cover crop. And then the third thing he did, which was pretty insightful, was that he implemented a lean principle approach to farming. And anybody that knows anything about manufacturing may have heard of lean. Lean is really focused on the elimination of waste and continuous improvement. So he combined all these principles together, and he's been practicing now for several years, and he's extremely profitable. And ironically, a lot of his profits haven't come from greatly improved yields, but they've come from an improvement in some of the resource consumption and costs associated with that. So he uses less fuel, he uses less water, less fertilizer, and so on. So in fact, he's been so successful that a new startup venture called Indigo Agriculture has now reached out to him to partner. And Indigo Agriculture is looking at partners that will work with them on carbon sequestration within their fields. So it's kind of a unique new startup, a new direction that he's going. But again, the point is, Adam used a lot of existing technologies, did a lot of research, of course, came up with a new system that he built on to be innovative. So like I said, I personally refer to this as copy tweak. I don't know where I heard this term before. I probably borrowed it from somebody, but copy tweak, I think we've all seen it in action or have done it, but essentially we take concepts of different ideas and we adapt them to our own situation and improve upon them. And some of the sources from these ideas, of course, come from our competitors. They can come from customers, adjacent industries, and by adjacent industries, I mean industries that might be kind of in similar spaces, like the example here of the veterinary space, converting or transitioning into human healthcare, or the automotive industry maybe has some applicability into the truck industry. So those would be different comparable industries where ideas might be collected. Geographic regions are another area where you can collect some ideas, see some different things in different countries or different parts of even our country, as with the case with Adam. And then another opportunity or option is within your own value chain and understanding what some of your suppliers are doing, or customers for that matter. The third example I want to talk about is a program that's been implemented at Avera, and this is Stephen Payne. Stephen, I don't know Stephen actually, but he's been associated with a program there that is called the internal Shark Tank. I'm not sure if that's the official word or not, but that's essentially what they're doing. And so they're encouraging their employees to build teams, come up with a pitch, and present to a group of judges, a panel of sharks. And then the sharks can choose to put resources into these ideas or not. And so it's kind of, a combination of a way to really foster innovation, but also be fun and have some sort of a competitive spirit behind it. And so that's kind of a neat program. I've also heard of other programs, not necessarily with Vera, but other businesses doing something called reverse Shark Tank. And in this case, you actually have some of the stakeholders of different parts of the business come in front of panels of innovators, and they'll present their problems, and they'll present kind of the pains and gains that they go through, and they'll challenge these innovators to come up with new ideas. And then they'll pick the group of innovators that have the best idea, and those will be resourced to do some work. So a couple variations on that. But on a broader sense, I mean, there are a number of ways that you can tap into your employees for different ideas. One is through this concept of internal business idea competitions, which is kind of what the Shark Tank is, but we also have our own competition at USD called I2I, and there are many examples of more of competition structured really on developing a business plan, creating a pitch, and then you get some kind of a reward for that, or you get supported to continue to the next step. There's also internal brainstorming exercises, and that is brainstorming is a kind of a unique skill that we're always learning more about. Sometimes it works well, sometimes not, but it's certainly used a lot. Some companies offer different rewards for metrics associated with innovation. Some, for example, reward patents, and some reward different ideas of that achieve certain milestones or receive certain scores in some sort of analysis. And then lastly, creating a support system for innovation. And what I am trying to kind of imply here is kind of a systematic expectation for an innovation process. And so I use Google as an example here. Google actually has a requirement that all their employees have to spend 20% of their time on innovating outside of their specific jobs. So one day a week, they devote to coming up with innovative ideas. And they also have some aids to help them do that. They have a system called design sprints that they do, which is like a 5-day-long event that that employees can participate in, and focused on different areas of innovation. So there are a number of things that they implement there that's part of this system-wide sort of approach. Okay, the last example, what I want to talk about in terms of specific individuals, is a gentleman named Josh Dyer. And Josh is the founder of Super Painters Pro. And in March, I guess, Josh was painting large-scale construction projects, apartment complexes, commercial buildings, had a pretty significant staff. And of course, that all has really dried up for him, and so he's found himself, in the same place that a lot of people are, looking for kind of what's the next thing that we're going to do? How am I going to keep my business going? How am I going to keep my employees busy? And so he reached out to the University of South Dakota and found that there was a technology that they had listed on the Tech Transfer Office website about an antimicrobial paint. And so Josh has started to take steps to figure out if he can commercialize this technology from USD. And so he's looking at what the cost would be to actually get this product to a state of commercialization where you can make sufficient quantities, figuring out what a license with USD might look like, is also figuring out, what kinds of funding he can generate through angel investors, finding people that will invest in this idea. And so he's really, it's really been very ambitious in kind of trying to tackle this brand new technology, which is really kind of outside of what he's done before. So that is an example of this idea of licensing technologies. And whenever I talk about this, I'm always met with, I think, a lot of people who don't realize just how much technology is out there that you can license from different sources. The University of South Dakota, this is a copy of their homepage for the tech transfer office. They actually have a list of the different disclosures and technology patents that they have applied for, and that they're trying to find licensees to take on. USD is one of many organizations that do this. Just about every university has a tech transfer office trying to do the same thing. And then in addition to that, there's a whole lot of government agencies that have all kinds of technologies that they've developed and patented, and they're looking for somebody to take them on and commercialize them. And the example on the right is actually from an email that I received today from NASA. And this is like a sampling of what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ideas in the environmental category out of probably 30 or 40 different ideas that they've listed. And obviously some of these may or may not fit with your expertise, but spending a little time doing some searching through these ideas, you can really come up with some very cool things. So it's kind of an exciting and kind of the sky's the limit sort of approach to coming up with new ideas. So that is a pretty quick kind of summary or overview of ways that are commonly used to really get that initial kernel of an idea that you can develop into a product. The next part of the journey, of course, is how to implement this idea, and this is where this startup model, I think, really starts to apply, even offering more value. Like I said, statistics would indicate that just about every startup, or most startups, I should say, that fail because they don't do a good job of developing a product that fits the market. And so we've come up with some tools and some ways to really verify that and do a better job over the course of the last few years. And part of that exercise also helps us really define the scope, which is important, because if the scope is too big, we can't deliver it. If it's too small, we disappoint our customers. So we try to define sort of the sweet spot, particularly for launching, that we call the minimum viable product. And that's just like it sounds. We want to introduce a product that has the minimum amount of feature set that we can incorporate, but still delights our customers initially out of the gate. Once we do that, once we have that figured out, we can always add features. We can always come up with version 2, but that initial product doesn't have to be all-encompassing. It just has to have minimum viability. The other thing I want to talk about, I won't have a lot of time to get into some of these other aspects of delivering on scope and fitness for use, but even if you can define a minimum viable product and scope, and you've got a perfect market fit, you've got to be able to deliver a product that is fit for use. In other words, it can't break. If it's something that is a handheld device, it has to survive being dropped, or it has to survive a certain usage pattern. So how do we understand that, and how do we plan for it? Then there's other aspects here about quality control, producing parts that are consistent every time, do exactly the job they're intended to do, and that kind of relates to our manufacturing process. And then lastly, how do we make sure that we have the right capacity to meet market demand? So again, I don't have as much time as I really would like to go through this, but I want to share this this idea of design thinking with you all. And design thinking is talked about a lot, and at the Stanford Design School, I think they're credited as being one of the first ones to really kind of package this in a process. But it's a system that you go through in terms of empathizing with your customer, and then defining your product, and then going through this iterative process of developing a concept, prototyping, testing, revising, prototyping again, testing, and then finally industrialization. And if you actually do this well, you can accomplish a lot of these steps, like the empathizing step, you can accomplish over the course of a weekend. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The defining step and sort of the iterative step. There was an exercise done by a company called IDEO, and I've included the link here in the YouTube video, where they went through this design thinking sort of exercise, looking at kind of redesigning the shopping cart, making something more useful. And I encourage you to watch the show. It's very popular and very well done, but they redesigned the shopping cart in a period of 7 days. So this process doesn't have to be months and months and months. So if you have a weekend, you have 7 days, in the matter of 2 weeks, you can go from an idea to something that you are ready to implement with some good insight and testing and validation. And again, that's pretty quick. So the first step that I want to talk about in this design thinking process is empathy mapping. And empathy mapping, here's the standard list of questions if you read about these concepts that you're trying to answer. But empathy mapping is pretty easy to do if you're looking at customers in a grocery store, but they're pretty it's pretty difficult if you're looking at more of a business to business kind of environment. It's really hard to figure out, what do my customers do every day unless I'm working with them. And, what do they say? What do they actually mean? So one of the alternatives, or maybe more refined ways to do this, was developed by the National Science Foundation, and it's called I-Core. So kind of like Marine Corps, only I-Core, which is Innovation Core. And the NSF developed this process because they were spending literally billions of dollars on new research, and they were getting really poor results in commercialization. And they wanted to figure out how they could actually improve this. And one of the things that they discovered pretty quickly is, like I've said numerous times, the main reason that these commercial ideas were failing is because nobody was able to create a market fit for them. So they figured out a model by which the model itself, the process relies on customer interviews. And so you define your customers very carefully. Your customer is not an institution, but it's actually a human being. For example, in our case, we went through this process with the current company I'm in called Halamine. We were called Halo Coding at the time, and this is our team. And we initially went in and said, well, our customers are the food processing industry. And we just got absolutely torn up by the I-Core folks. And they trained us pretty quickly that your customer is actually the food safety director within Smithfield Foods. So it's a very specific person that you're defining. And the reason you're doing that is you're really trying to answer these empathy-related questions. What do these people really care about? And so the other part of the I-Core process was to use a scientific approach. And so they said, they taught us to develop a hypothesis about what we believed our customers were looking for, and then to go in and ask informed questions, not direct questions, but questions that allowed us to really understand a day in the life, how our customers were motivated, how our customers were evaluated, and really understand what made them think, what jobs they had to do, and what they perceived to be value and what we were offering. So again,
hey Greg, I'm just going to jump in quick.
What's that?
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to kind of tie that in. You mentioned the IDEO video on the previous slide, and I'll be sure to send out the link to everyone as well. But I felt like in that, 6-minute segment or whatever it is, they do a really good job of kind of just showing that on the fly and how quickly they were able to really dig in and get good customer interviews. So anyone that thinks this sounds daunting, definitely check out that video. It was really interesting. I hadn't seen it before, but it definitely kind of shows the process. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Jennifer. Thank you. So, it is, yeah, to Jennifer's point, something that is proven, and the National Science Foundation has endorsed it and uses it numerous times a year with different cohorts, and it doesn't take long at all. Their complete program is designed to be 7 weeks part-time, and they establish 100 interviews through this process. And you can do abbreviated versions of this if you're really under duress. So, so that's an option definitely for defining this product market fit. So these last slides I'm going to go through real quickly because we're running shorter on time, but the remainder really of the product realization process is to figure out your scope, determine your fitness for use, and then establish a quality assurance plan. And I think we probably, like I said before, should do a separate segment on this, but it's important, first of all, for you to really understand your scope of your minimum viable product, because changes in scope are disastrous in terms of risk and in terms of cost and in terms of timeline. So keep that in mind. The other part of this is figuring out what kinds of other uses or what kinds of other expectations your customers are going to expect with your product, and then what kinds of quality assurance measures do you need to take to make sure that you produce the same product over and over again. And this may sound like, oh my gosh, we're talking about all these design parameters and all these different criteria and considerations. And unfortunately, the risk of not doing this kind of stuff, of not being insightful with this kind of activity, is potentially going to result in a product that fails. And so it's been proven over and over again that to do a good job and to be somewhat thorough at these steps may take a little bit of time and planning, but there's a statement about failing fast. You really, it's much cheaper to fail when you're working with sketches and with cardboard and styrofoam than it is when you figure out, you're halfway through launching some sort of a new concept, maybe even in a restaurant, maybe a new menu item or a new restaurant format. You've spent all this money and you've done all this work, and you find out, oh wait, we didn't think of that aspect of customer satisfaction. Now we need to go back and make a whole bunch of other changes. And that's really expensive, and it takes a lot of time. So one of the tools that I really wanted to just highlight here that we use a lot in kind of the lean manufacturing world, it's one of the parts of the lean toolkit, or the Lean Six Sigma toolkit, is this thing called a failure mode and effects analysis, and also known as an FMEA. And it really forces you to go methodically through your concept of your design. You can also do it with your process of implementation to try to anticipate where failures could occur, what the effect of those failures are going to be, what the causes are, and what you have in place now that can control those failures from escaping. The typical FMEA process has a severity, an occurrence, and a detection ranking from 1 to 10 based on impact to the customer. And then it calculates a risk priority number. And if you're really sophisticated, you can have a threshold of that risk priority number that establishes, things above a 100 we have to react to. And then once you react, you rescore, which is what the second half of this chart is for. So I'll introduce that concept here. I can talk more offline about it if you want to know more, but this is really helpful in doing more of a proactive risk assessment of developing a new product. So with the time that I have left, I want to just quickly talk a little bit about two other points. One is organizational change, and the other is preparing for the next crisis. So switching gears a little bit, this is, first of all, organizational behavior is not something I personally have studied from an academic standpoint much at all, but a lot of this comes from experience in a lot of startup environments and a lot of corporate environments. And I see really two kinds of behavior. There's habitual behavior and there's organizational behavior. The habitual behavior is, you know, is my desk clean? Do I, you know, do good planning practices every morning for time management? You know, what kinds of things are automatic? And these habits are formed as an efficiency mechanism. You know, we go into a new environment and we've got kind of this hypersensitivity. You know, think of the first time you drove a car, you had to figure out where the blinkers were. You had to really concentrate on every single aspect. And as you became more and more familiar with it, it just became habitual. You know, you automatically put your seatbelt on. You didn't even think about it anymore. And so we form these habits subconsciously. And really it's to allow us to be more efficient. These habits are generally cued by environmental factors. You know, we get in the car, we put the key in the ignition, we grab the seat belt. You know, that's just a cue. That sequence happens as soon as we sit in the car seat. The flip side of that is the organizational side, and this is more related to our kind of our psychology, you know, and it kind of gets to our identity of who we are at work. And really it's, you know, it's related to our role within the corporation, you know, what our responsibilities are, what kind of control we have, what authority, where we fit in the value stream of what we do. And so that's a little deeper. And so the first part, the habitual change part, you know, when we get into a crisis mode, this is a great opportunity to change bad habits. We had, there's a process called 5S in one of the companies that I worked for. 5S, by the way, is a lean process, lean manufacturing process. Really, it revolves around being organized and efficient in your workspace. And we tried to implement this 5S process a number of times with the existing management structure, always failed. But we introduced a new CEO, our new president to the company, and he went in, you know, and gave a fire and brimstone speech about making all these changes, and, you know, new sheriffs in town, all kinds of things. Implemented a 5S program, did the exact same steps that we had tried to do in other parts of the organization. And wouldn't you know it, it actually sustained for a significant period of time. And it was just that condition of leadership, opening people's minds to being receptive and really kind of disrupted to the point where their old habits really weren't so ingrained anymore and they were ready to do something new. So I put a reference here called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And James Clear doesn't talk so much about corporate habits, but he talks a lot about personal habits, both good and bad, and how you form habits, how you break habits. And so a good kind of, a lot of applicable things here to changing habits at work. Some of the things he talks about is to make bad habits obvious, make it easy to do, to incorporate good habits, make it attractive, or you can flip that over to try to deal with bad habits. And then triggers are a big part of what prompts us. You know, I talked about getting in the car seat as a trigger to put your seatbelt on. So understanding that. And then the third point that he makes is a concept called habit stacking. So if we have one habit or maybe two sequential habits, we can insert a third habit in between, and actually then is pretty effective. Organizational changes are a different story, and so there's so much information out there about, you know, how to introduce change for people who dislike it and how people are naturally going to resist it. But I read some interesting information about kind of a contrary view of this, and the argument was this: that people really actually do like change. People change their clothes all the time. The fashion industry is fundamentally built on the fact that people want change. The self-help industry, the travel industry, people want to do different things. The reason that they generally will gravitate towards change is they want to be inspired. They want some kind of self-improvement. They want to have authority over change, not just be told, this is the change that's going to happen. Now you need to own it. So again, we could talk for an hour about this particular subject, but I thought this particular, was recent for me, and I thought it was pretty insightful. So I put this in. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but a lot of people have been asking a lot lately about how do we actually create an innovative culture. And again, there's more information out there, more articles about this than you could ever read. But these are 5 steps that I thought were kind of useful. And it really, I think they all kind of tie into creating this support of innovation at senior levels of management. So lastly, just one slide on preparing for the next crisis. So what are some of the advantages that come out of a crisis that can allow us to gain some insight on how to be ready for the next one? These are some of the things that I could think of. First of all, what COVID-19 is doing in this case is it's really forcing me, especially in my business, to really do a much better job on our digital infrastructure. We have had terrible security systems. We had a really poor website. We really weren't focused at all on any kind of outreach. It was just kind of a necessary evil. We had to have a website. Well, now that's changed. The website's really important because, number one, we're getting a lot of attention. Number two, we're using, some of these digital tools a whole lot more. So that's really forced us to pick our game there. The second is re-examining your talent strategy. In the case of having an existing business focused on executing, you can get by if you have a pretty centralized control scheme, and if you have a lot of your systems kind of automated or highly defined. You don't have to rely so much on talent. But if you're really going to get challenged, that might fall apart. So you might want to think about that. The next point is, crisis time is potentially an opportunity. If you have some cash and you're in a strong position, to find some partners that might be weakened in this particular state. So you might want to consider that strategy. Another point that I think is obvious, but it's something that a lot of companies do, is really to look at ways that you can now address your cost structure, ways to be more efficient, fix things that have always been bothersome in the past, which you didn't have time for. Implementing an innovation program, like I talked about, is something that is possible now, and it's looked at as being a highly encouraged step. And then lastly, a lot of companies are developing formal contingency plans for their key operations. If you don't have one of these, now's a good time to really look at that and think about what you can do. So with that, I'm out of time and kind of out of breath going through those so quickly. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer some.
That was great, Greg. And I also put a note in, if anyone has to hop off, that you would be happy to take questions offline as well. But there was a ton of great information there. I know you had used a good example yesterday when we were kind of talking through this about, as far as the habits go, if a business wants to kind of work on their overall cleanliness and disinfecting practices, now is a great time to do it when people are starting to come back into the office and kind of set the precedent now. I know every time I watch one of the press conferences and I hear the doctors and leaders say, we really want you to keep washing your hands with soap and water. I just wish that would be something people would adopt moving forward from here on out, because I think it's good practices. So I thought that was a great example that you gave, and definitely a good time to be thinking about that.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, if anyone does have a question, feel free to chime in here. Otherwise, there was a ton of great information. This is recorded, so I'm going to send it out to everyone. And feel free to go back through and check out any parts that maybe you didn't quite catch all of it. And like I said, and like Greg said, we are definitely going to explore the option of doing some webinars that dig in a little bit deeper on some of these topics, because this was, a lot of great information packed into 1 hour, but I think we can definitely get in depth more down the road. All right. Well, it looks like we've lost a few, so kind of last call if anyone has questions. Otherwise, thank you so much, Greg. This was wonderful, and I'm sure you're going to be getting some follow-ups through email as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would be happy to address those. So thanks for hosting, Jen, and I enjoyed it. Like I said, hopefully we can put together some follow-up sessions to dive a little bit more deeply into some of these other concepts or topics.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, thanks everyone. Go enjoy the beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.